Saṁyutta Nikāya, the Connected Discourses, Sagāthāvagga Saṁyutta, Vaṅgīsa Sutta, Connected Discourses of the Venerable Vaṅgīsa, Vaṅgīsa Vagga, Suttas 8.1 to 8.12. Sutta number 8.1, Nikkhanta Sutta, on renouncing and turning away. I have personally heard this. Once upon a time, the Venerable Vaṅgīsa was residing at the Aggalava Stupa in the town of Alavi, along with his preceptor, the elder Venerable Nigrodhakappa. This took place when the Venerable Vaṅgīsa was still a novice monk, having just newly gone forth as he left behind his householder life and ordained. Then, one day, several women, who, having dressed in their finest, while making themselves seductive in their appearance, came and approached the monastery at the Aggalava Stupa, curious to see where the monastics lived. Now the Venerable Vaṅgīsa, on seeing these women, he was infected and overtaken by lust, where he could not stop thinking about those women with passion obsessively dominating him and everything he did. Then he began reflecting. It's truly sad, it's terribly horrific, that I have let myself vulnerable to being infected and overtaken by lust, where I cannot stop thinking about those women, with passion obsessively dominating me and clouding everything I do. This is no good at all. I must find someone to get me out of this demoralizing trap, to dispel this cloud of discontent immediately. But how could anyone really get me out of this demoralizing trap or dispel this cloud of discontent? I, on the other hand, can and must. Then, in an attempt to come out of his stupor and thus to reignite in himself the zeal and energy for living the holy life, the Venerable Vaṅgīsa, right then and there, began speaking these verses to himself. Despite having decided to renounce and willingly turn away from living the life of a householder, being left without a home anywhere, now I'm blinded and utterly defenseless, it seems, left at the mercy of these horrible and evil thoughts that have taken over and overrun my mind. But I know my resolve is stronger now more than ever before. For even if I were surrounded from all sides by thousands of archers who shoot their arrows at me from every corner, I will still be standing here and never flee, fearlessly ready to receive every single one of them. And now, even if many more women were to approach this place, I will be unshakable in my resolve, unmoved as I stand firm in the Dhamma, never to be bothered or stirred somehow by what or who it is that's in front of me. After all, this certainty I have in me is the result of what I personally witnessed from none other than the kinsman of the sun, the Buddha himself, who showed me the guaranteed path to Nibbana Supreme. And this fact itself is enough to soothe my heart while giving me peace. So whoever comes near me or wherever I might be, as I live at this vihara, will find me solidly anchored and restful, no matter what I may get to see. Because by the time when I'm dead and gone, there won't be any traces left of me to find, to somehow try to look for the path I take in their futile attempt to locate me. Aratī Sutta on aversion, Sutta number 8.2. I have personally heard this. Once, the Venerable Vaṅgīsa was residing at the Aggalava Stupa in the town of Alavi, along with his preceptor, the elder Venerable Nigrodhakappa. Now, this took place at the time when Venerable Vaṅgīsa had just newly gone forth through his strong faith and left behind his householder life, and thus ordained. Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa, on seeing how usually his preceptor, the Venerable Nigrodhakappa, having gone for his alms round and returned, once he ate his meal, he would then re-enter his kuti and remain there, without coming outside to interact with him or others. This would sometimes last for a few days. Now, eventually, doubt crept into the Venerable Vaṅgīsa's heart, as he saw his faith weakening, where uncertainty arose in him about his decision to be living the holy life. Thus he became emotionally unsettled due to the perplexity and internal agitation, where passion obsessively dominated him and everything he did. Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa began reflecting. It's truly sad. It's terribly horrific that I have let myself be vulnerable to becoming infected and overtaken by uncertainty like this, where I cannot stop being so agitated, with passion obsessively dominating me and clouding everything I do. This is no good at all. I must find someone to get me out of this demoralizing trap, to dispel this cloud of discontent immediately. But how could anyone really get me out of this demoralizing trap, or dispel this cloud of discontent? I, on the other hand, can and must. Then, in order to get rid of the slump he was in, and therefore to reignite in himself the zeal and energy for living the holy life, the Venerable Vaṅgīsa, right then and there, began speaking these verses to himself. The life of a bhikkhu is about freeing oneself from any and all entanglements, while getting rid of the ever-present need to build new relationships. That longing dominating the hearts of householders who are always on the lookout for new companions and connections. But a bhikkhu is one who's already given up by renouncing both aversion and delight. Individuals can't see themselves without their assets, always chained to whatever they see or hear, as well as all that they come to experience or sense, allowing all these things to stir up disgust and revulsion in them. But whoever, meanwhile, remains untouched by all these, while pulling and tossing out from within the very interest in them, is declared as a true sage, for not clinging nor being smeared by all such things. Deeply entrenched and hopelessly stuck in their opinions, unlearned, common people are bound up by more than 60 different wrong views, as they are dragged about and beaten down by their own attachments to mindless convictions that go against the Dhamma. However, the bhikkhu is one who steers clear from such fools and never sullies his role, nor lowers himself to their level by speaking lewdly as they do. Composed, collected, and free from conceit, the Arahant dwells thus, honestly, living his life with no jealousy or envy. This because he, having stepped onto the farther shore, is truly at peace, patiently waiting for his time, being already fully released. Sutta number 8.3, Pesala Sutta, the genuinely kind. I have personally heard this. Once, the Venerable Vaṅgīsa was residing at the Aggalava Stupa in the town of Alavi, staying close to his preceptor, the elder Venerable Nigrodha. Then one day the Venerable Vaṅgīsa, while comparing himself to his fellow bhikkhus and their level of intelligence and quick-wittedness, began having disdain towards them, especially when looking at his own level of eloquence in poetically expressing difficult-to-convey emotions by weaving them into lovely verses. Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa began reflecting. It's truly sad. It's terribly horrific that I have let myself be vulnerable to feelings of conceit, as I find myself infected and overtaken by contempt towards my fellow bhikkhus, who are really good and honest people, looking at them with such scorn and disdain simply because they are not so eloquent in poetically expressing difficult-to-convey emotions by weaving them into lovely verses. Then, on regretting having those feelings towards his companions in the holy life, the Venerable Vaṅgīsa, in order to reignite in himself the zeal and energy for living the holy life proper, he right then and there began reciting these verses to himself. What's this conceit, O Gotama? Give it up and drop this whole comparing and contrasting, for all these prideful thoughts will keep you stuck, leaving you in an endless turmoil of remorse, brought on by all this measuring. Due to the contemptuous drive to put others down, this generation of people goes on smearing one another, looking at ways to insult and sully others. Sooner than later, drags one to the depths of hell. Once there, in the miserable realms, even though they may forget the very role of conceit they possessed in their hearts for others, that deposited them there into the depths of hell, they nevertheless go on suffering as a result of that for a very long time. But, on having practiced and applied himself correctly, the bhikkhu who wins the path, having entered the stream, will never come to grieve or worry about such suffering ever again. Instead, he comes to enjoy genuine happiness he'd never tasted before, along with being rightfully recognized as a seer of truth indeed. So, open up your heart and soften it too, while igniting it with the blazing fire of effortful energy, to burn away all the hindrances and give them up entirely. Thus, By giving up conceit altogether, taste the purity of becoming completely pure, using the penetrative insight that arises from it to break utterly free and attain true tranquility by putting an end to all suffering. Sutta number 8.4, Ānanda Sutta. The Venerable Ānanda. Once, the Venerable Ānanda was residing in Savatthi, dwelling at the monastery donated by Anathapindika at Jeta's Park. Then, early one morning, the Venerable Ānanda got up and, by putting on his robes and taking with him his outer robe and bowl, went into the city for his daily alms. Now this was on one of those days when the Venerable Vaṅgīsa was accompanying him as his attending monk, walking right behind him. Then, while still on their alms round, the Venerable Vaṅgīsa, on seeing some of the women in the village, lost his internal composure and started having second thoughts about his decision in having gone forth. Thus he found himself fighting the lustful thoughts and passionate desires that had now infected his heart. In wanting to alleviate his troubles, he spoke these verses to the Venerable Ānanda. Passion to experience sensual pleasures is raging within me. My heart is consumed by a burning to taste them. I beg you to speak to me on how to quench these blazing flames, ravaging and tearing my mind apart. Please, O Gautama, out of your kind compassion, instruct me on what I must do to come out of this misery. Then the Venerable Ānanda spoke to him by instructing. Your heart is consumed by a burning to taste sensual pleasures, because you've let your sannyas take charge of your mind, letting yourself open to the flurry of incessant perceptions to burst through to you, unchecked, infecting and poisoning your mind thus. So whatever attractive signs or features you might see or witness in any way, and all that's attractive or tries to grab your attention, all that and everything that seeks to pull you away or inflame your heart, immediately turn away from and drop them on the spot without thinking twice over it. By focusing on the fact how all conditioned things are in themselves ultimately nothing more than suffering, and without an essence to even be called a thing, seeing their emptiness thus, extinguish the flames of raging passions that burn inside, instead of being caught in them, yet again and again, to be burning in them perpetually. So, with a mind that looks at and sees the very presence of the ugly and repulsive in whatever you perceive in forms, stay intently focused and sharp, anchoring your mindfulness nowhere else other than on the body. And in no time you will set yourself free from ever becoming a victim again, nor get hooked or trapped due to your ever-growing disenchantment. Therefore, place your attention fully upon the signless. Give up the underlying tendency to conceit and constant measuring, because the moment you fully understand conceit and the callous role it plays in keeping you in delusion, only then will you become free and finally taste what it truly feels to be at peace. Sutta number 8.5, Subhāsita Sutta. Beautifully expressed. Once, the Blessed One was living in the monastery offered by the lay disciple Anathapindika at Jeta's Park in Savatthi. It was then that the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus by saying, "Bhikkhus?" "Yes, Bhante," replied the bhikkhus. "Bhikkhus, when the words you use possess within them 4 factors, they are then considered to be well spoken indeed." Beautifully expressed. Well-uttered words, and therefore not to be criticized by the wise, as they would be blameless. What are these 4? Here, the bhikkhu speaks only well-spoken and appropriate words, and not what is unsuitable or poorly chosen for the occasion. He speaks virtuous words, and not those that lack any virtue. The bhikkhu uses speech that is lovely, strewn with amiable words, and not the kind that is intended to harm and with ugly words. He speaks words that are truth and not lies. Therefore, bhikkhus, when the words you use possess within them these 4 factors, they are then considered to be well spoken indeed, beautifully expressed, faultless, well-uttered words, and therefore not to be criticized by the wise, as they would be blameless. This is what the Blessed One said. Then the Blessed One uttered the following verses. The noble ones declare words that are well spoken to be the most excellent and beautifully expressed, whereas avoiding non-virtuous words and only speaking those that are strewn with virtue, they consider as its second beautiful quality. Speaking lovely and amiable words happens to be the third, and not speaking any lies but only what is true happens to be its 4th quality. Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa arose from his seat, and while arranging his upper robe over one shoulder, and bringing his hands together in front of his heart, he directed them towards the Blessed One, and said the following words. O Holy One, I find myself inspired. I feel it necessary for me to speak a few words, Bhante, if I may. The Blessed One replied by saying, Speak then, Vaṅgīsa, whatever it is you feel inspired by. Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa spoke in verse, while sharing his heartfelt words in praise of the Blessed One and in his presence. Only speak in a way that will not cause harm to either oneself or another. For such indeed is the nature of the well-spoken word. Only speak lovely and amiable words, because of which there occurs joy in the hearts of listeners, both during speech and even later. Therefore, speak words that do not cause evil to trail behind them. Truth is the deathless word, and this itself is the eternal law. The noble ones, being established in truth themselves, declare it to be the very essence of the holy life. The words uttered by the Buddha lead one to true safety, for they are spoken from his attainment of freedom and the realization of Nibbana itself. They indeed take one to the end of suffering. Truly, this is the best kind of speech. Sutta number 8.6, Sāriputta Sutta. The Venerable Sāriputta. Once the Venerable Sāriputta was living in Savatthi, dwelling at the monastery donated by Anathapindika at Jeta's Park. Now, on one of those days, the Venerable Sāriputta kept instructing, encouraging, motivating, and inspiring the bhikkhus gathered at their meeting hall with a Dhamma talk on Nibbana itself. Meanwhile, those bhikkhus were intently focused, with their hearts entirely absorbed in it, as they carefully listened to every bit of Dhamma they were receiving, not letting any of it to slip by their attention. Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa, who was present, witnessed how the Venerable Sāriputta was instructing, encouraging, motivating, and inspiring the bhikkhus gathered at their meeting hall with a Dhamma talk on Nibbana. And also, he saw how the bhikkhus were intently focused with their hearts entirely absorbed in it, as they carefully listened to every bit of Dhamma they were receiving, not letting any of it to slip by their attention. Thus, the Venerable Vaṅgīsa felt inspired to speak in a way to express the beauty of what he witnessed taking place. So he arose from his seat, and while arranging his upper robe over one shoulder and bringing his hands together in front of his heart, he directed them towards the Venerable Sāriputta and said, "Friend Sāriputta, I find myself inspired. I feel as though I have to speak a few words. Avuso Sāriputta, if I may be allowed to do so." And the Venerable Sāriputta replied by saying, "Speak then, friend Vaṅgīsa, whatever it is you feel inspired to express." Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa spoke in verse, while sharing his heartfelt words in praise of the Venerable Sāriputta and in his presence. With such depth and clarity of understanding, he goes on instructing. The wise one, who is an expert in identifying and pointing out what indeed is the path, by distinguishing it from all that is in fact not the path. Sāriputta, in his vast and deep wisdom, sits with his fellow bhikkhus, carefully and lovingly teaching them the Dhamma. Whether speaking and instructing in brief, or explaining the Dhamma at length in its minute details, his voice, like that of the robin bird, keeps inspiring the hearts of all those who hear its lovely songs. Thus, he goes on teaching and instructing those bhikkhus gathered with their hearts wide open. His sweet voice, as exquisite as that of a nightingale's, speaking to them gracefully and with such clarity, as they all pay close attention not to miss a single one of his lucid words, with hearts that are appeased so joyfully. Sutta number 8.7, Pavāraṇa Sutta. Invitation to be corrected. Once, the Blessed One was residing in Savathi's eastern monastery, donated by Megara's mother. He was sitting together with a large Sangha of about 500 bhikkhus, who, having completed the training, were all now arahants themselves. Thus, while being surrounded by all those arahants, sitting in the open air during the Uposatha full moon on that night of the 15th, the Blessed One looked upon the assembly of the Sangha of Bhikkhus that was utterly quiet and tranquil. It was then that he began addressing them by giving them the invitation to be corrected, as he encouragingly stated, "Bhikkhus, I invite you all by giving you the opportunity to come out and speak up, by pointing out any type of behavior you may have seen in me, your teacher, things that you saw as being questionable or inappropriate in my conduct. Feel free in coming forward to address, and thus correct, actions I have committed, whether through body or speech, that you found to be deserving of scrutiny or criticizing." Now, once he finished speaking, the Venerable Sāriputta arose from his seat, and by approaching the teacher, began arranging his robe over one shoulder, and while raising his joint palms towards the Blessed One, started speaking these words. "Bhante, for us there is absolutely nothing to point out or to speak up about, nothing to highlight or try to address in order to correct some type of behavior in the Blessed One or his conduct. For we have neither seen nor found anything in the Tathagata's actions, whether committed through body or speech, that would deserve any scrutiny or criticism. After all, the Blessed One is himself the one who has brought for us the path. For he indeed has revealed the path for us all, while giving us the ability to truly see. He is the one who opened the path to the indescribable for us all to witness. He alone is the matchless one, guiding us and clarifying the path for all of us who came after. For it is your courageous footsteps that we have followed, blessed Lord, that led to each of us, your faithful disciples, to attaining the culmination of the path you revealed, as we also acquired for ourselves that which had never been tasted, let alone attained before. And now, for our turn, blessed Lord, we invite our great teacher to please kindly speak by pointing out any type of behavior he may have seen in me, his disciple, that he may consider as being questionable or inappropriate. Kindly, blessed Lord, point out to me, by addressing any and all manner of conduct, by correcting those actions I have committed, whether through the body or speech, that are now deserving of scrutiny and criticism. Sāriputta, there is absolutely nothing to point out or to speak up about, nothing to highlight or try to address in order to correct some type of behavior in you. For I have neither seen nor found anything in your actions, whether committed through the body or speech, that would deserve any scrutiny or criticism. After all, Sāriputta, you are truly wise, for your understanding is both great and deep indeed. Sāriputta, by having immense wisdom, you always carefully see the multifaceted nature of things. Also, Sāriputta, you are relaxed and very lively in applying your wisdom, without belittling or condescending towards your listeners at all. while at the same time generously sharing the enormous wealth of your knowledge and understanding with others. Sāriputta, the wisdom you possess is both quick and fresh, for it never becomes stale nor stuck in any conclusions. Therefore, Sāriputta, your wisdom is truly precise and unmistakably sharp. And for these reasons, Sāriputta, you are indeed unique, in that your wisdom penetrates straight through, with incredible level of discriminative and thorough understanding. Imagine, Sāriputta, the case of a universal wheel-turning monarch, in whose absence his oldest son rightfully maintains the rule of law by wielding his power precisely as required and set in motion by his father, the Chakravartin. Now in just the same manner, Sāriputta, rightfully you keep the Dhamma rolling, precisely set in motion by me, your teacher, by rightfully maintaining it. Having carefully listened to the Blessed One's words, the Venerable Sāriputta then uttered these words while addressing his teacher. In that case, Bhante, seeing that I have not engaged in any kind of actions that would need correcting, hence no behavior of mine that would be deserving of your scrutiny and criticism, then could there be anything that my fellow bhikkhus here may have committed, whether through bodily or verbal actions, that would deserve the Blessed One's scrutiny and criticism, behaviors that would need correcting? There are none, Sāriputta, for there is absolutely nothing to point out or speak up about, nor anything to be highlighted or addressed in order to correct some type of behavior in these 500 bhikkhus gathered here. For I have neither seen nor found anything in their actions, whether committed through the body or speech, that would deserve any scrutiny or criticism. After all, Sāriputta, among these 500 bhikkhus, 60 have attained to the 3 higher knowledges. 60 have attained to the 6 supernatural knowledges. 60 are liberated in both ways, while the rest are fully released through their penetrative insight. It was then that the Venerable Vaṅgīsa, feeling inspired to speak, to express the beauty of what he was witnessing taking place in front of him, arose from his seat, and by arranging his upper robe over one shoulder, approached the Blessed One. Then, while bringing his hands together in front of his heart, he directed them towards the great teacher and said, "Blessed Lord, I find myself deeply inspired. The heart feels compelled to express, for I feel I must speak a few words inspired by what we are witnessing here, Blessed Lord. That is, if I may be allowed to, Bhante." And the Blessed One exclaimed, "Speak then, Vaṅgīsa, whatever it is your heart feels inspired to express." Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa spoke in verse, while sharing his heartfelt words in praise of the Blessed One, by speaking the following fitting verses in his presence. Today, on this pure Uposatha's full moon of the 15th, 500 bhikkhus have all come to gather, each of whom is a true sage in his own right. Having unshackled themselves by severing off all the fetters that bind, these indeed are the ones who will never take any more births ever again. Like the wheel-turning monarch, the King of Kings wanders around his vast dominion that's bordered only by the great ocean, while accompanied by his excellent and trustworthy ministers who lovingly want to be close to him. In the same manner, those disciples who, having attained to the three higher knowledges, are now conquerors of death themselves, for they too are now assembled here, as they lovingly stay close to their Master, honoring in their quiet worship the matchless caravan leader, who, being the very first to beat and vanquish death itself, has shown them all the path to freedom. All these sages, after all, are the sons of the Blessed One, so there's nothing of the mundane to be witnessed here, no riffraff either to be found here in this sacred gathering, as I worshipfully bow my head at the feet of the Buddha, the true kinsman of the sun, the one who showed us the path to successfully destroy the poisonous arrow of craving. Sutta number 8.8, Parosahassa Sutta, with more than 1,000. Once, the Blessed One was residing in Savatthi, living at the monastery donated by Anathapindika within Jeta's Park. This was at the time when a large Sangha of bhikkhus, made up of 1,250 in number, was also staying in the monastery, as they accompanied and learned from their teacher by dwelling close to the Blessed One. Now on one of those days, the Blessed One was sitting surrounded by his disciples as he kept instructing, encouraging, motivating, and inspiring the bhikkhus gathered there, delighting their hearts and minds with a series of Dhamma talks he was giving them on the attainment of Nibbana. Meanwhile, those bhikkhus intently focused their hearts entirely on these Dhamma talks, as they carefully and delightedly kept listening to every bit of Dhamma they were receiving from their teacher, not letting any bit of it to slip away somehow. Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa witnessed how the Blessed One was sitting while surrounded by his disciples, as he kept instructing, encouraging, motivating, and inspiring the bhikkhus gathered there, delighting their hearts and minds with a series of Dhamma talks he was giving them on the attainment of Nibbana. Meanwhile, he saw how those bhikkhus were intently focused in their hearts entirely on the Dhamma they were receiving, as they carefully and delightedly kept listening to every bit of Dhamma from their teacher, not letting any bit of it to slip away somehow. At this, the Venerable Vaṅgīsa felt inspired to speak and to express the beauty of what he witnessed taking place. So he arose from his seat, and while arranging his upper robe over one shoulder and bringing his hands together in front of his heart, he directed them towards the Blessed One and said, "Blessed Lord, I find myself deeply moved and inspired. The heart feels compelled to express, by speaking a few words inspired by what we are witnessing here, Blessed Lord." And the Blessed One exclaimed, "Speak then, Vaṅgīsa, whatever it is your heart feels inspired to express." Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa spoke in verse, while sharing his heartfelt words in praise of the Blessed One, by speaking the following fitting verses in his presence. Outnumbering 1,000, they have come, the bhikkhus, all here to honor the great teacher, as they worshipfully listen attentively to every single word that leaves his lips. He teaches and instructs them the Dhamma that is truly stainless and pure, showing them the way to Nibbana Supreme, where no threats could ever exist any more for the heart, having finally reached true safety, with no fears to arrive from any shore. Cautious, they sit in silence, closely listening to the impeccable Dhamma, lest they may accidentally miss a single syllable, let alone a phrase, being taught to them by the one and only perfectly self-awakened Buddha, the Blessed One himself in the flesh, speaking to them as his luster shines so brilliantly, sitting at the head of the Bhikkhu Sangha. Blessed One, you are indeed the Naga Supreme, the most excellent of all sages. For just like the massively heavy cloud that brings with it life to all beings, the liberating words of your wisdom that heals keep showering down upon us all, your disciples sitting here. Longing to approach and see my teacher once more, I walked away from my meditation seat today, which is why your student Vaṅgīsa has come here yet again, to place his head at your blessed feet in reverence, O matchless hero. Then the Blessed One addressed the Venerable Vaṅgīsa by asking the following question. Now, Vaṅgīsa, did you compose these verses earlier, before approaching us? Or did they spontaneously occur to you and thus float out of your heart right here as you speak? They spontaneously occurred to me, Blessed Lord, and thus flowed out of my heart right here as I spoke them, Bhante. Well, Vaṅgīsa, in that case, feel free to speak more of your inspired utterances if you feel naturally disposed to do so. With delight, Bhante, replied the Venerable Vaṅgīsa, as he continued to utter more inspired verses in addressing and extolling the Blessed One in his presence, while spontaneously speaking the following words. Vanquishing the incessant tricks and misleading paths of Mara, the evil one, you never quit in your endurance while maintaining a soft heart, despite the countless hardships you experienced along the way. Behold, the one who freed himself through his own efforts, by shattering all those bonds with which beings are held captive. And now he feeds us the teaching that liberates, morsel by morsel, making it digestible and understood just like a loving parent would, nourishing his child. In so many ways, you have patiently explained the very method through which one may cross the flood, by carefully showing us the path again and again. It is no surprise, therefore, to see the very many who stand on the solid ground that is the deathless, upon which they now stand firmly secured through the instructions you lovingly give. You are indeed the very light of existence, penetrating through each and every layer within its realms, where nothing could escape your all-seeing gaze. Having finally found the deathless, generously you went sharing it in all its magnificence with the original group of 5, the first of us bhikkhus, to whom you taught what you had discovered, and after so much difficulty. And with the Dhamma that is so thoroughly explained, how can one who finally comes across it possibly allow oneself to become negligent or indifferent to it? For this reason, one must strive on relentlessly, never giving up until the goal is reached, pushing forward with renewed effort and diligence that's unprecedented, while closely training according to what the Blessed One teaches, always respectful towards the great teacher, every step of the way. Sutta number 8.9, Koṇḍañña Sutta, the Venerable Koṇḍañña. Once, the Blessed One was living in Rajagha's bamboo grove monastery, where squirrels would come to gather food. Then, one day, the Venerable Koṇḍañña, who saw and understood first, came and approached the Blessed One, after not having seen his teacher for a very long time. He moved so quietly, as he began bowing respectfully by lowering his head, with which he touched the Blessed One's feet, caressing them gently with his fingers, and wiping them softly with his overflowing tears of joy. And as he softly covered his teacher's feet with gentle kisses, he spoke by declaring his own name. O Bhagava, I am here. It's Koṇḍañña, who's come to pay his respects to his beloved teacher. Blessed Lord, I am your Koṇḍañña, O Holy One, here to see and honor you once more. Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa, who was present, witnessing this, began reflecting. How wonderful! This is the legendary Venerable Koṇḍañña, who saw and understood first, who's now come and approached the Blessed One, after not having seen the teacher for a very long time. The Venerable One, Koṇḍañña, moves so quietly, bowing respectfully as he lowered his head, with which he touched the Blessed One's feet, caressing them gently with his fingers, and wiping them softly with his overflowing tears of joy, as he softly covers his teacher's feet with gentle kisses, speaking and declaring his own name. O Bhagava, I am here. It's Koṇḍañña who's come to pay his respects to his beloved teacher, Blessed Lord. I am your Koṇḍañña, he says, O Holy One, here to see and honor you once more. And right then, the Venerable Vaṅgīsa, feeling inspired to speak in order to express the beauty of what was taking place in front of him, he arose from his seat, and by arranging his upper robe over one shoulder, approached the Blessed One. Then, While bringing his hands together in front of his heart, he directed them towards the great teacher and said, "Blessed Lord, I find myself deeply stirred with joy. The heart feels compelled to express, by speaking a few words inspired by what we are witnessing here, blessed Lord." And the Blessed One encouragingly spoke by saying, "Speak then, Vaṅgīsa, whatever it is your heart feels inspired to express." Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa spoke in verse, while sharing his heartfelt words of praise for the Venerable Koṇḍañña, by uttering the following inspired verses spoken fittingly in the Blessed One's presence. The senior most among us is now here, the one who saw and understood before anyone else among us, attaining awakening right after the Blessed Lord himself. Koṇḍañña, the second in line, is brimming with life-giving energy. He is truly a living inspiration for us all, bhikkhus, for he enters and dwells into states of deep tranquility and happiness with such ease, while living secluded, far from everyone's eyes and company. Whatever that is to be experienced and known by a disciple, following closely the advice given to him by his teacher, all that he has attained indeed, through his own unrelenting diligence, while dedicating himself completely to the training. And now, possessing unparalleled reputation and mighty power, along with the 3 higher knowledges, as well as the ability to see through what's deep in people's hearts, Koṇḍañña, who was the very first to see, the true heir of the Buddha indeed, now lovingly bows down with his head at his teacher's feet, which he respectfully covers with his gentle kisses and warm tears. Sutta number 8.10, Moggallāna Sutta, the Venerable Moggallāna. Once, the Blessed One was living in Rajagha's Isigili peaks, while accompanied by a large Sangha of more than 500 of his Arahant bhikkhus, all of them dwelling at the Kalasila rock. It was then that the Venerable Moggallāna, with his own heart, began looking into the hearts of that large group of Sangha, wanting to find out for himself as to how many of them did in fact possess hearts that were truly released, and thus completely rid themselves from all kinds of assets. Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa began reflecting on how wonderful it was to have the Blessed One living there in the Rajagha's Isigili peaks, surrounded by that large Sangha of more than 500 of his Arahant bhikkhus, all of them dwelling together at the Kalasila rock. Also, he became inspired when he saw how the Venerable Moggallāna, with his own heart, was looking into the hearts of that large group of Sangha, wanting to find out for himself as to how many of them did in fact possess hearts that were truly released, and thus completely rid themselves from all kinds of assets. Now, in becoming thus inspired by all that was taking place around him, the Venerable Vaṅgīsa arose from his seat, and by arranging his upper robe over one shoulder, approached the Blessed One. Then, while bringing his hands together in front of his heart, he directed them towards the great teacher and said, Blessed Lord, I find myself deeply inspired. The heart feels compelled to express, by speaking a few words, on what we are witnessing here, Blessed Lord. That is, if I may be allowed to do so, Bhante. And the Blessed One exclaimed, Speak then, Vaṅgīsa, whatever it is in your heart that feels inspired to express. Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa spoke in verse, while sharing his heartfelt words in praise of the Venerable Moggallāna, as he began speaking fittingly inspired verses in the Blessed One's presence. The mighty Naga sits like a mountain, having gone beyond all turmoil and suffering, surrounded by his disciples, all sages themselves, who having attained to the three knowledges, have vanquished death itself. Now they all sit with gladness, while quietly paying homage to their hero. Meanwhile, with his own heart, so pure and mighty, Moggallāna, through his superior powers of great psychic abilities, investigates closely as he looks deep into the hearts of the many, carefully penetrating to see for himself whether they're truly freed, fully released, and left assetless indeed. Thus, each in his own way pays homage to the most excellent teacher, who's gone beyond all turmoil and suffering, Gautama, who deserves all heartfelt honorifics directed to him, for he truly is accomplished in so many ways and beyond compare in his countless attributes. Sutta number 8.11, Gaggarā Sutta. At the Gaggarā lotus pond. Once, the Blessed One was living in Champa, spending his time dwelling on the Gaggarā pond's bank, along with a large Sangha of more than 500 bhikkhus, as well as 700 upasakas, male lay disciples, and 700 upasikas, female lay disciples. But much greater in size still were the multitudes of devas that were there, who were countless in their numbers. Yet, among that vast group of countless beings, the beauty and luster of the Blessed One remained unmatched, for the brilliance emanating from his figure was beyond any measure. Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa began reflecting on how incredibly wonderful it was to have the Blessed One be living in Champa, spending his time dwelling on the Gaggarā pond's bank, along with that large Sangha of more than 500 bhikkhus, as well as 700 upasakas, the male lay disciples, and 700 upasikas, the female lay disciples, and how greater in size still were the multitudes of devas that were there, who were countless in their numbers. In becoming thus inspired by all that was taking place around him, the Venerable Vaṅgīsa arose from his seat, and by arranging his upper robe over one shoulder, approached the Blessed One. Then, while bringing his hands together in front of his heart, he directed them towards the great teacher and said, Blessed Lord, I find myself deeply inspired. The heart feels compelled to express, by speaking a few words inspired by what we are witnessing here, Blessed Lord. That is, if I may be allowed to, Bhante. And the Blessed One exclaimed, "Speak then, Vaṅgīsa, whatever it is your heart feels inspired to express." Then the Venerable Vaṅgīsa spoke in verse, while expressing his heartfelt words in praise of the Blessed One, as he began speaking fittingly inspired verses in the Blessed One's presence. Just as the bright, spotless moon shines brilliantly in the clear, blue darkness of the night, or the way the singular sun spreads its warm, life-giving rays as it lights up everything on its path. In the same manner, you, O Angirasa, the greatest of all sages in the entire cosmos, your dazzling beauty and luster remain unmatched, for the brilliance radiating from your figure outshines everything else there is. Incomparable indeed, you are, beyond any measure. Sutta number 8.12, Vaṅgīsa Sutta, the Venerable Vaṅgīsa. Once, the Venerable Vaṅgīsa was living at the monastery donated to the Sangha by Anathapindika in Savathi's Jeta's Park. Now this was the day when the Venerable Vaṅgīsa just attained to full awakening and become one of the Arahants. Thus, as a result of him still experiencing the bliss of true freedom, with the heart completely released from the asavas, the Venerable Vaṅgīsa felt deeply inspired to utter the following verses. In the past, we used to wander here and there, looking for ways to lose ourselves in the exchange of verses tossed back and forth, getting intoxicated by the poetic words we uttered, as we enjoyed creatively weaving them together, floating about from town to town, where getting a certain emotional rise from words we considered as the very pinnacle of living life. But then, the moment I beheld the self-awakened Buddha in the flesh, the heart became suddenly frozen in time, and deep faith was born in my heart, an experience that was unlike any other I'd ever known. He kept instructing and teaching me the Dhamma, explaining to me carefully the 5 aggregates, as well as the 6 sense spheres and the elements entire. On listening carefully and hearing his teaching, I couldn't help but to leave everything behind as a layman and just go forth into homelessness. People often forget how it was for the purpose of helping countless beings that compelled the great sage to achieve awakening supreme in the first place, after having undergone such hardships in the process. And now, both bhikkhus and bhikkhunis, having crossed the flood, stand with certainty unparalleled upon the solid ground that is their personal experience of what he taught, each and every one of them, one by one. Oh, what great joy, and how lovely it is indeed, the great fortune I so appreciate having thus enjoyed, in being so close to the Buddha Supreme, where even in the very presence of the matchless teacher, I have truly attained at last the 3 great knowledges myself, and thereby faithfully completed my Master's bidding. For I know and see each of my births I've had, and the lives too, through the divine eye that's finally purified in me. Now, I too possess the psychic powers, along with the three higher knowledges. Thus, I've become a master indeed, an expert at looking into the hearts of beings, where I can see clearly whatever they might be hiding in the deep. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.